Hello and welcome to Bristol Reptile Emporium's YouTube channel. I'm Gail.
And I'm Michelle.
And today we are going to talk about Chinese water dragons. Michelle's holding one in her hand and they can be a little bit flighty, would you say? Run around a little bit. So she'll be moving quite a bit to try and keep hold of it.
Yeah, it seemed a good idea to hold one at the time. Yes, so they are quite active in your hands.
Right, okay. So let's get into it. What sort of lifespan did you guys have?
So approximately about 15 years in that region.
Quite a while then, I suppose, with all reptiles. It's always a lot longer than what we expect, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And what sort of size would they get to?
So these are, you know, a fair sized lizard. So we would expect these guys to get in the region of about 90 centimetres or 3 foot. Now, as you can see, most of that is tail. So if you can see, we've got almost two thirds of the animal is the tail itself. But that's the sort of overall length that you would expect.
Okay. So what type of food do they eat?
So they primarily insect-based diet, but they would occasionally feed, as juveniles, sometimes you can get them to feed off with a little bit of leafy green, and if they're introduced to it at a young age, sometimes we can get them to eat some fruits as well, but that's really sporadic and it's also quite dependent on the individual lizard, but the main bulk of the diet is going to be insect-based.
Right, okay. And how often would we feed them?
So we feed live food every other day, just really to encourage them to eat the live food that we provide and not to leave loads of it left behind in the enclosure.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So obviously you can handle these guys?
You can. They tend to be quite free-willed and independent spirits. So even one that's fairly used to being handled will like to do its own thing, not necessarily want to be like cuddled, if that makes sense.
That does make sense.
So they might sit on you and tolerate going, oh, there's a human there, and I'll sit on it for a bit, and then I'll go off and splash around and do other things, maybe land in my water bowl and then sit on you again and get you nice and soggy. But they're not really ones that they don't actively seek interaction to the same level. Something like a bearded dragon, for example.
That makes sense. So if we do handle them, how often would you recommend?
So that's going to vary depending on the age of the animal and also the exposure it's had to handling. So we are working quite hard with these juveniles. Obviously this is not an adult water dragon, but we're working really hard with these to be more tolerant. And you can sort of see, you looking at me like, oh my god, what's she doing? And you'll probably dart off and they'll have to go chasing from under the desk or something in a minute. But you start off with short periods of time and build it up, and then eventually you may be able to have them out for quite a while without any problems at all.
Right, okay. So what type of enclosure of vivarium would we keep these in?
So these guys are arboreal, so this is going to be quite a big enclosure because obviously they're a big lizard. It's all length, but we need to provide room for it. So I normally recommend something in the region of about 4 foot in length, 2 foot in depth and 4 foot in height for these guys. But I've got some customers with some really lucky water dragons that have been able to give them more space than that, and they really do enjoy having all that height to climb, and they need plenty of room to get that tail to move around in so they don't get trapped in areas and things like that.
Well, 90 centimetres in length is quite long really for a reptile, isn't it?
It is.
You've got to give enough space for that tail. So they require light. What would you recommend? Yeah,
so we are going to provide UVA, UVB light nutrients for this animal, and we're going to provide it a minimum of a 5% UV. Obviously there are different percentages that could be used for a forest species, and we talk about these in other videos, but yeah, minimum of a 5%. So that's really important for the absorption of calcium, again something else that we've gone over in another video, and we're going to pair their UV with a separate heat. Well, you could do it in one if you want to, but we were looking at a heat source as well. So obviously they don't come from the UK, so we are providing additional heat. It's probably going to jump on my face. So we are looking to provide a basking spot in the region. Most people go anywhere from cooler months of the year might be 28 through to about 35 Celsius. Enclosure size is going to have an effect on this as well, so that's something else to bear in mind. But yeah, they come from Asia, so they like it warm and they like it humid as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And what would we provide on the bottom? What substrate would we give them?
So we're looking for a substrate that retains moisture because that's going to help with our humidity. So loads of different options. Again, we've spoken about moisture retentive substrates in other videos, but things like cocoa fibre or an orchid bark or a mix of the soil and different substrates, which are great for bioactive, and these guys are a suitable species for bioactive.
That makes it much more interesting as well, doesn't it?
Gives you a bit more diversity then in your enclosure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about a water bowl earlier, so we have to provide a water bowl for them. Do they drink from that, or
yeah, so
it?
well, there's a bit of splashing and paddling involved, so that's great. So they've got it in their name, Chinese water dragon.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the wild they'd often be found over streams, lakes, rivers, and they'd be hanging out in the canopies of trees and things like that. That would hang over these water sources. So they really like to sit above their water supply, and they also quite like to pass waste into it.
Oh, lovely.
So it wants to be something that's quite easy for you to remove, or if it's something that's built in, it needs to have an addition for like filtration so that you can clean it and maintain it and not have waste build up in that water. But yeah, they need a fair volume of water within their enclosure.
Oh, okay. And is there anything else that you would put in there? Any certain type of plants or?
So as you say, you could go bioactive, and that could include live planting, or you could go artificial and use, you know, a selection of the decor that's available, some of which is in the shop behind us. So there's loads of options. You could do 50-50. They don't really use hides quite that much because where they like to position themselves. So we haven't got to worry about too much about that, but we want loads of branches, loads of cork bark. You know, if you've got a nice piece of cork bark in an enclosure, up high, they can go in it, on it, round it. They're really agile, even for their body mass as adults. You see him there, just chilling. He's going to dart off. So it's really nice to be able to provide those different different textured decor for them to move amongst and over. No running away. And yeah, it's just about making it look nice and what is appealing to you as an owner, as well as providing foliage for them to hide in and feel secure in as well.
And something to stimulate them. They can wander around in and everything as well, can't they?
Very much so, yeah.
Is there anything else that we need to know about the water dragons?
I will give you one slight drawback for water dragons, that some owners may come up with this information when they're doing their research before looking into water dragons. They used to be quite renowned for being face rubbers.
Okay.
So when we keep an animal in an enclosure, if everything's not 100% right, sometimes they can get a bit stressed. Yeah. As all of us do in life, you know, it happens to the best of us. And sometimes for water dragons, that form of stress can manifest itself in going up to the glass and sort of rubbing their nose along the front of the glass, and they can have like a rub mark on the actual on the front of the face and on the jaw. Now, normally, if we provide a range of decor, we can reduce that stress and possibility of reducing this behaviour. Yeah. And it's not something that develops in all water dragons, it can just be in some water dragons. And there's lots of things that we can do to help reduce it if it does occur, but it is something that sometimes crops up when you're doing research about these animals, and it shouldn't be something that puts you off them. It's just something to be aware of, and sometimes we may need to move the viv or move some decor so that we can stop a behaviour and stop it having long-term health effects.
Thank you for watching Bristol Reptile Emporium's YouTube channel.
Don't forget to subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you next week for another video. Bye!
Bye!